Okay, folks, if you'd grab your seats, please. They're filling up rapidly. And welcome, folks, to the 175th meeting of the Lexington Veterans Association. We have a lot of folks here who I've not seen here before, so we'll give you a very brief thing of what we do here. First of all, Bill Stern is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Where are you hiding, Bill? Sir? The flag is right to my left. We are ready. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. We have, for those of you, we do this every Monday during the academic year, except for the month of October, because yesterday, Monday, was a holiday, and always is, so Tuesday we meet in October. Other than that, it's the second Monday of each month. We do publish schedules, but if you want to get on a computer list, a mailing list for your email, and you've not done it before, there's a yellow legal pad there. You can just put your email address on it, and you'll get the schedules in the mail. But there are some blue schedules right there on the same table of the schedule that's going on right now. I just have the newer schedule, which we call the fall of 210. We're already working on that. I'll have copies of those at the next meeting. Anyway, so there's, and then Bill Kennedy, one of our guys here, does a wonderful job. He's our PR guy, gets stuff in several newspapers, and is pretty well written up. A little warning here, if you're not familiar with Lexington, we have a parking Nazi who wanders around seriously all the time. You've got to be very careful, make sure that you don't go over the 1 hour or whatever it is. You're all set on that, Bruce?
Yes. That's
No, one day one of our speakers was fined $100 because unfortunately he parked right here in the handicap thing. That was a serious one, but nonetheless, please beware of the parking. Starbucks Coffee down in the middle of Lexington Center very generously gives us about 80 cups of coffee. It's sitting on the back table there. And certain folks bring in cookies and the like, so there's always some little goodies, whatever, if you want to come down early to talk or stay later to talk. Very generous of Starbucks, and we thank them for that. Before we make a presentation here, and before I present Bruce, I'm always up here yakking, it seems to me, saying too much. Anybody have any comments or questions as to what, something you'd like to say about Veterans Affairs or whatever? Okay. All righty. Tim Whitson's the young man standing in the back. Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
I'm a volunteer with the Veterans VA, and we need volunteers, so if anybody would like to volunteer, we welcome you with open arms. Just go over to the VA, to the volunteer room, and we'd love to see you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Tim Whitson, a member of our committee, was in Vietnam in 1967, and he spoke to our group in January of '07, and I think his talk was called Vietnam Highlands, something like that. Anyway, Tim was a young man looking very sharp in his blue blazer. And what happened in Vietnam when they were leaving, after the mess there are some things missing. One of them was the Bronze Star, which had been awarded to Tim. And so through the intercession, I think is the right term, of Ted Kennedy, just before he died, or his office, they came up with more paperwork and the medal itself. And his friend, Tim's friend, Bill Kennedy, who's the gentleman in uniform back there, is going to make the presentation. So Bill, if you would bring Tim up here.
Lieutenant Whitson, I'd like to present this Bronze Star for you for meritorious service in the combat zone of Vietnam in 1966-67.
I would love to say a few words.
Go to
Use the mic.
Oh, okay.
Watch the table.
You want to go around this way? Hi, Bruce. I'm Tim.
I'm Tim. Nice to meet you.
Yes, I was awarded the Bronze Star at the 4th Infantry Division farewell formation. It was an awards ceremony in the base camp, Camp Aneri, named after one of my very good friends, Mark Aneri, who was killed. He was the first officer killed over there, and the camp was named after him. And I was told by the guys that were running the ceremony that we weren't allowed to carry our Bronze Stars home with us in our baggage. And I thought that was a little peculiar at the time, but they said that all the medals would be mailed to our home addresses, and so they verified our home addresses on a clipboard and so forth. And unfortunately, not just my medal, but dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of other medals were stolen. The mail heist was an inside job. I found this out because when I got home, my award and my citation were not there, and so I wrote a handwritten note to the fella in Vietnam who handled the administrative end of it, and he said that we had a terrible time with your group, because I had deployed with the 4th Infantry Division out of Tacoma, Washington, out of Fort Lewis. And so when you go over in a body of 15,000 men, we all came home a year later, which was kind of peculiar, but in itself. But the response from him was that here's an informal note explaining what happened, and he told me how a temporary company clerk had sent him out unregistered, no paperwork, no paper trail whatsoever, and he was saying that there's nothing he could do at that time to replace it. So I contacted the Army, and they, for 41 years, denied that I had any record, or they had any record, excuse me, of my Bronze Star. And so here it is 41 years later, and each letter I sent to them with evidence, the best evidence that I could round up, they denied every letter. So I went to Senator Kennedy's office, because one of the responses said, there's nothing further we can do for you. Go see your congressman. So that's what I did. And his staff was awesome. Tristan and Jackie and Matt, young interns, they went to bat for me. And there was an ironic twist when my medal eventually showed up the same week that the senator passed away. So I'm delighted that my friend Bill Kennedy here of 25 years can be here to present this to me today. So I just wanted to also have my wife come up. Where's Ann? Don't you want to come up here? Well, without her, the little voice inside that kept saying plug away, it finally happened, but only with the help of Senator Kennedy's staff, I might say. So it's a great honor for me today, and Bill, I salute you for what you did, and thank you very much.
Make this one count.
Just for those, I'm sure that I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but just for those of you who don't know, the Bronze Star Medal is awarded to any person who, serving in any capacity in or with the military of the United States, distinguished himself or herself by heroic or meritorious achievement or service while engaged in an action against an enemy of the United States, or while engaged in military operations involving conflict with an opposing foreign force.
Thank you. I got a phone call last night from Edith Flynn, who's Pat's wife, delightful lady. Our speaker in February is a man named Ted Perry, who's speaking on the U.S. Army mules in World War II. Fascinating talk, I've seen him give it. And the reason that Edith called me was that Pat, very interested in coming down for this, he's not terribly well, because he was carried off a hill in Italy in World War II on some mules. And there's still actually quite a few mules in the Army. They use them all over Afghanistan. Our speaker next month, which is Monday the 9th of November, is John Carlson, who's speaking on Douglas MacArthur. I've heard him give that, a wonderful speaker. Now, no more questions, comments? Bruce Abele is the oldest of 3 sons of Lieutenant Commander Mannert Abele, who commanded a sub in the Pacific in World War II. Bruce is going to present what many have said is one of the more fascinating stories to have developed out of that era. Bruce Abele.
Thank you. September 30th, 1942 was a Wednesday. It was a nice fall day. About 3:30 in the afternoon, my brothers and I were tossing a football around in the street in front of our house in Newton, Mass. Our mother called us in to show us a Western Union telegram that in essence said that the Grunion, the sub commanded by our dad, had not been heard from and was presumed lost. At the end of the war, there was an extensive search for any clues as to what happened to the Grunion. Nothing was found. The fate of the Grunion has remained on the books for 66 years as missing, cause unknown. That's the background. Now, if we can turn the lights off over here a little bit. School year 1941-42. The Abele family lived in a rented house in Mystic, Connecticut, just a few miles from the subbase in Grunion. For some reason, we always called our dad Jim. No idea why, we just did. Jim had been given command of the submarine USS I don't know how to turn it up. I can't do it.
It was launched December 22nd, 1941, just 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor. 5 months later, Sunday, May 24th, 1942, Jim suggested that we have lunch at the officers' club. Afterwards, he said he had work to do on the sub. We drove home alone. Later that day, our mother got a call from one of the wives of the crew that the sub had been seen going down the river. Because of wartime secrecy, Jim had not been able to tell us anything. His first letter began,
My dear Kay, just a note to say that we are on our way. Sorry I couldn't give you more definite information.
Grunion arrived in Pearl Harbor on June 20th. That summer, we were living in a converted barn in Rhode Island. On the 27th of June, our mother received a telegram. Love and best wishes. I'm feeling fine, but miss you. Jim Abele. 2 more letters followed.
June 27th. Dear Kay, as most every officer says, Writing letters has practically become a task rather than a pleasure, for there is next to nothing that one is permitted to say. July 4th. My dear sweetheart, this letter is a surprise one in that it is unexpected. There is no telling where it is from. Furthermore, I have no idea when you will get this.
Grunion had left Pearl 4 days earlier. Our mother wrote back,
Well, I certainly was happy yesterday when the operator called with a message from you. It made me feel so great I decided to go to Nancy's wedding and the high school reunion.
Meanwhile, during the month of June 1942, on the other side of the globe, the Japanese had occupied a remote part of continental United States called Kiska Island. It is at the western tip of the Aleutians. A brief review of Aleutian geography is in order. Starting from Seattle, Washington, it is about a 1,600-mile trip northwest to Anchorage, Alaska, about the same as Boston to Oklahoma City. From Anchorage, it will take a 3-hour flight west to make the 780-mile trip to Dutch Harbor. Next step is Adak, difficult by plane because of the mountain along with low cloud cover. A significant number of flights are canceled. It's about a 500-mile trip. If you do it by boat, it's about 2 days. The last leg of the trip to Kiska is about 250 miles, and because of the fog, it's impossible by plane. Boat is the only option. The most dominant characteristic of Kiska is fog. There are no trees on the island. During the month of June 1942, 424 tons of bombs were dropped and 330 tons of shells were lobbed onto the island. Because of the terrible weather conditions, Allied forces paid a severe penalty for that effort. For the occupation, Kiska housed just a few weather observers. Today, the island is covered with remains from the Japanese 14-month occupation. Back to the converted barn. Life was quite different from what we know today. There were no dryers. The only way to get clean that summer was in the Sakonnet River using lava soap. It was sort of important because we worked at the dirty job of picking potatoes, by the way, at 35 cents an hour. We spent a lot of time caring for a victory garden and canning the produce. Wheels for this cart were from a telephone cable reel, the shafts from saplings, and the axle from the trunk of a tree. We used it to lug everything, and it worked quite well.
That's Bruce and John, by the way.
The war was in everybody's mind. At the end of the summer, we had moved to Newton, Massachusetts. Wednesday, September 30th, 1942, was a nice fall day. We were tossing a football around on the street in front of the house when Mother called us in to show us a Western Union telegram. It, in essence, said that the sub commanded by our dad had not been heard from and was presumed lost. A couple of days later, it made the newspapers. Because the crew came from all parts of the country, Iowa, Tennessee, North Carolina, New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, Michigan, Illinois, Maryland, Maine, Massachusetts, Georgia, Connecticut, Florida, Louisiana, Missouri, North Dakota, Alabama, D.C., Ohio, and New Jersey, it became national news. Our mother was heavily driven by principle, yet she was now left with 3 small children and no means of support. In spite of that, she managed in her free time to send a handwritten condolence letter to every one of the 69 next of kin. A few months later, our dad received the Navy Cross. Our mother felt that every man on the crew deserved that honor, and there was a second letter. She received replies from almost all of the next of kin. Even today, they're hard to read with a dry eye. They give a vivid view of the thinking during that period. Here are some examples.
Do you know if there was a boy on the sub from a place called Charlevoix, Michigan? I hear from a friend of this family. They have a boy that is captured. And this was sneaked out and brought back and broadcast on a New York radio station in such a way his parents learned about it. And he said his whole crew was taken. Mrs. Charles Post, Midland, Michigan.
Some time ago, I heard from a friend of my son who was a radio operator in Dutch Harbor. He feels that there is a good chance that they have been captured, and that after the war, he could tell me more. Mrs. Sophie Blinston, Billings, Montana.
My constant prayer is that our sailors will come over the horizon soon, but should God not will it so, and should they have gone, may their going not have been in vain. Gladys C. Dole, Cincinnati, Ohio.
At the end of the war, there was an extensive search of both Japanese and American records for any clues as to what might have happened to the Grunion. Nothing was found. The sub has remained on the books for 65 years as missing, cause unknown. Jump forward 50 years to 1995. About this time began a stream of improbables. This is one of the more significant. This is Lieutenant Colonel Richard Lane. In 1995, he spent $1 in a Denver antique shop for a wiring diagram from the Queen of Maru, a ship that had been in the Kiska area 50 years ago. He thought it might have antique value, so he put it on a Japanese naval website asking if anybody could authenticate it. A Japanese naval architect and history buff called Yutaka Iwasaki answered, acknowledged it, but most important said he thought he knew what happened to the Grunion. Lieutenant Colonel Lane recognized the importance and got this information posted to the official Navy sub website. Even though it had been posted to the Navy website, we hadn't looked at it for years. About that time, Brad, our middle brother, had just finished several years researching what appeared to have happened to the Grunion. He put it together in a book we call the Jim Book. It described what appeared to have happened to the Grunion and in great detail described what life was like without our dad. Though written for the family, it attracted a lot of attention and got passed around all over the country. 7 years later in Denver, Colorado, Bruce's daughter-in-law showed the book to her boss, a World War II history buff. He passed on to us the URLs of a number of Grunion websites, and that is when we discovered Yutaka's post. Needless to say, that started an intensive search for Yutaka's email address. After going through a string of 72 emails, John found a post from Yutaka. He sent a note asking if he was the one who knew about the Grunion. The answer, it's me. Sincerely, I pray for the repose of your father's soul. Yutaka provided us with a translation of an article written by Ira, the military commander of the Queen Maru, and published in an obscure Japanese maritime magazine. It described in considerable detail a confrontation near Kiska between the Kanemaru and an unknown American sub. Our Navy was not aware of the confrontation. This is what appears to have happened. The Kanemaru is heading for Kiska Harbor, trying to avoid MacArthur's Reef. It turns toward the harbor. The signalman spots a torpedo. The Kanemaru turns to starboard to avoid the torpedo. The first one goes to the stern. The second torpedo hits on the starboard aft side, explodes, shutting down the aft deck gun, the engines, and steering. The Kanemaru drifts west. Meanwhile, the sub stays submerged, heading north to get away from the heavy fortifications on Kiska. The third torpedo is a dud and goes under the Kanemaru. The distances on this animation are misleading. The sub was much farther away than indicated. Sub starts to circle behind the Kanemaru, firing a fourth torpedo, which bounces off the Kanemaru without exploding. The fifth is also a dud and bounces off. The sixth goes to the stern. Still submerged, the sub starts turning to port. Meanwhile, the Kanemaru's forward 8-centimeter gun and machine gun are firing at the periscope whenever it appears. An 8-centimeter shell from the Kanemaru hits the wake caused by the bridge. There is a dull thud. Dirty brown liquid shoots up, and a rod shoots up and falls back. The next day, the Japanese observed an oil slick. However, the identity of the sub was not known for 27 years when Tatsuka Nakazawa, Vice Admiral of the Imperial Japanese Navy, identified the sub as the Grunion. He published his findings in a series of Japanese war history books. Next, October 2005. John, who spends a lot of time on the lecture circuit, bumped into Bob Ballard of Titanic fame, who was providing the entertainment. They got discussing the Grunion. What Bob did was to give us an education on the mechanics of finding a sub. What we learned is that you locate the target with a side-scan sonar, and then follow up with a remote operated vehicle with cameras, called an ROV, to identify what you found. The original plan was to use Bob for the search, but other commitments made that impossible. The next several months were spent trying to narrow down the search area, which started at about 100 square miles. In trying to analyze Yutaka's translation describing the location of the confrontation, there were questions such as, were the bearings magnetic or true? What was the speed of the Kanemaru? How accurate was the celestial fix? There was a major breakthrough when Yutaka and a fellow researcher, Minoru Kamata, found this chart of IRAs in a pile of some 270 documents. It provided us with the almost exact coordinates of the attack. An interesting aside, the original translation started with a position of 12 nautical miles on a bearing of 158 from Segula Island. It would have put us considerably north of where we should have been. We suspect a translation error. It should have been 12 kilometers, not 12 nautical miles. A kilometer is about half a nautical mile. Another project was to find a boat able to handle the awful weather in one of the most remote parts of the world. What we ended up using was this crab boat, the Aquila, that had been fished the area for years. We also had to find a side-scan sonar able to handle depths of almost a mile. Not easy because most are limited to depths of 1,000 feet. In addition, the idea of working in the remote part of the Aleutians was not at all attractive. An organization, Williamson Associates, not only turned out to be able to handle those depths, but had also worked in Aleutian waters. Here they're getting the ship ready for the side-scan search. Mobilization took place in Dutch Harbor, which is about 780 miles west of Anchorage. There were no roads to Dutch. Material had to be shipped in by barge. A side-scan sonar works by sending out sound pings to the left and right. They bounce off hard targets, such as a ship, and show up on a monitor as sort of a fuzzy black mark. The swath width can be as large as 3 miles, so a lot of area can be covered. The descender acts as a sort of shock absorber to eliminate movement of the ship. Up and down movements of the towfish will cause distortion of the image. There was a 3-day trip from Dutch Harbor to Kiska. There was some rough weather on that trip. Here they're trying to prevent the descender from being washed overboard. And this is Kiska. Except for the peak, it's almost always fog covered. Again, classic Kiska, and why the FAA will not allow charter flights to the island. A side-scan search starts with a plan like this, designed to be sure areas are not missed. In the actual search, when the side scan is at the end of the line, the blue J crane is used to launch the descender. The descender is almost 1 kilometer down, and the side scan about 1 kilometer behind that. Next, the control room where Mike Kelly, the target analyst, is looking for viable targets.
High resolution, but it'll be better resolution than we have, because we're going to tighten up the swath list. So basically, we're taking a closer look with the same sonar, getting a little bit closer to it to get another idea of what they look like, a better idea of what they look like, of the targets that we like. Really, there's not that much, but there's one target that looks pretty good. It looks like it's the right dimensions to be what we're looking for. And it looks like it's a little bit, there's some sediment on it. It's not as hard as I'd like to see, but I see it from 2 different angles. It shows up really well, so it looks pretty good. It's definitely worth looking at.
What does it look like?
Looks like it might be a submarine. I mean, it's long and thin.
On August 15, 2006, they came upon a target that was about the right length, about the right breadth, and with the use of some enhancement software appeared to have an appendage called a prop guard, characteristic of that class of subs. It also appeared that a significant portion of the bow was either missing or buried. Most importantly, it was almost exactly where predicted by our source. There's another dimension to the story that is almost as large as the discovery of the sub itself. These 3 remarkable women, Rhonda Ray, Vicki Rogers, and Mary Bentz, are affectionately known as the sub-ladies. In a parallel effort, they undertook the immense task of finding and notifying relatives of the entire crew of 70. They have never met. As of August 23, 2007, they have found relatives for every one of the crew of 70. After 65 years of not knowing, the responses they received from relatives are something that will never be forgotten. They have used every search tool imaginable, and quite a few you can imagine. This is how it started. Some time ago, Bruce's wife Susan was surfing the web and came across a post of Rhonda Ray looking for information about a crew member of the Grunion. Bruce wrote her on the chance that she might be interested in looking for relatives. She was. Over the internet, she recruited Vicki Rogers, who was also looking for Grunion information, and the great search began. Here is how Vicki found the son of the Grunion's executive officer, Milliner Thomas. After the war, Mrs. Thomas remarried but was widowed a second time. Vicki found a third marriage to a Mr. Stevens in the Pennsylvania marriage records. Name changes made the search very difficult. She then found Mrs. Stevens' name listed in the Social Security Death Index in Florida. Unable to find an obituary, she searched the probate records. Probate records listed two sons. One was Peter Stevens. Her third husband had adopted Milliner's son Pete, whose name was then changed to Peter Thomas Stevens. Vicki contacted every Peter Stevens in Florida and Pennsylvania. Our Peter Stevens had an unlisted phone, but public records said he lived in Allentown. Vicki wrote to every Stevens in Allentown. The letter that finally reached the correct Stevens went to Pete's daughter's house. She passed it on to her father. This is the third sublady, Mary Bentz. By getting on a talk show in Detroit, she found a relative for the last member of the crew. That took place the same day, August 23, 2007, that we rediscovered the sub. In addition, she has managed to get articles published in local newspapers for a significant portion of the crew. Here is a sample. With some luck and a lot of perseverance, there will be an article published for every member of the crew. Which did happen. The purpose of the second search that took place in August 2007 was to use a remote operated vehicle along with high definition cameras to determine whether the target located the previous year was the Grunion, and to see if we could determine what caused its demise. The Search 07 started in Falmouth, Massachusetts, where the ROV, several thousand pounds of accessories and a large winch were loaded onto a flatbed and trucked 3,100 miles across the country to Seattle. They were then loaded on the crab boat, the Aquila, the same boat we used last year. The next problem was to get the Aquila, the ROV, and a lot of other equipment to Adak, where the rest of the crew would be picked up. The problem was that that part of the ocean is known for bad weather. How bad? Listen to Kenzie, the 15-year-old daughter of the ship's owner, as she describes what it was like after being at sea for a week.
Okay, I am thoroughly done with the swells being taller than most houses. I haven't gotten sick yet, but I blame that on staying in bed whenever I can. If the swells were in some organized pattern that I could get used to, things would be better. But no, Leave it to the sea to be utterly chaotic. It's obnoxious. Normally swells are fine for a day, but it's been a week now, and I do believe I've earned my way to land. Thank you very much. It is nice to not be surrounded by fog anymore. Last night, we actually saw stars. Yay! Today, we have low clouds and wind. The wheelhouse door is open. The Aleutian air coming in is making my fingers cold.
This is ADAC. Next, 240 miles to Kiska. Because of an impending storm, the only window of opportunity was overnight. This is the weight, actually an old railroad wheel, to which the ROV is attached. Next, the ROV is lowered. It is attached by a tether to the weight and then controlled from above. This is the control room. The individual on the left controls the movement of the ROV. On the right, the camera settings. In the center, the sonar.
Where is the gun now? Is it up there above? Oh yeah, there it is to the left. Can you raise the camera a bit?
This is the 3-inch gun that John was looking for. The mystery surrounding the loss of the Grunion continues. Here is a sample of what was found. This is what the sub looks like today. Jim Chrisley is the artist. Another view. About 52 feet of the bow is missing. The break is in the middle of the forward torpedo room. One of the things that's worthwhile noting is that the crimping is inwards on that, and that gives us that's an important clue. The periscope has a severe dent just below the head. It appears that it may have been hit from a round from a machine gun. Which meant this is the aft battery hatch. A close examination will show that the gasket is out of its groove, that the wheel is marked with the word close, and that the locking mechanism is broken. It is almost certain that what opened that hatch was a water hammer effect when the sub imploded. You can see right at the top of that little piece, there's a piece of threaded rod, and that was broken off.
At the bottom of the photo is the upper conning tower hatch. Normally it has a flat bottom, but here it has been clearly damaged. One hypothesis that is getting a lot of attention is that there was a circular torpedo that hit the hatch but didn't explode. A torpedo weighs about 3,000 pounds and moves at about 53 miles an hour. So the blow would have opened the hatch, possibly shifting the entire conning tower and then flooding the control room. The result would be loss of depth control.
The difficulty with that hypothesis is that to have a circular torpedo, it would have had to come out of the stern. And we know that there were no torpedoes left in the stern, so that has been sort of ruled out recently. That has probably been caused by hydrostatic damage to the conning tower, which in turn bent the hatch.
The hydrostatic damage aft of the bridge, damage caused by 1,300 pounds per square inch of water pressure, is extensive. The aft escape hatch is missing completely, and the engine room hatch is badly distorted. The damage on this part of the boat is also extensive, in particular just in front of the bridge. There is a question whether this break goes into the control room.
That perforated material there is actually from the decks, and how it got down there, we're not sure.
The sub slid about 2/3 of a mile down a slope that started at about 30 degrees and ended up about 14 degrees. This is the path.
Which has remained that way for 66 years.
One of the interesting things about this project is that because it was done on our own without government assistance, we are not locked administratively or traditionally to any pre-established methodology for determining the credibility of the loss of the Grunion. For example, we do not have to use the jury system, a board of inquiry, peer review, or even a second opinion. We can use whatever methodology selects the most credible hypothesis for the loss. Over 50 years ago, there was a major work by Shannon and Weaver called Mathematical Theory of Communication. It has been fundamental to the information revolution. It is a math similar to geometry, except that instead of dealing with space and objects, it deals with the elements of communication. One of the things it addresses is the credibility of data communication, how machines can determine the credibility of a transmitted block of data. The principle, namely that credibility is a function of a stream of consistency, would appear to be applicable in this analysis. This project is providing us a chance to test whether that theory is applicable to areas broader than data transmission. In that light, what we can say with a reasonable degree of credibility is that the loss of the Grunion was not a simple transformation. It involved a number of elements with complex interactions. As a result, what we have done at this point is to start to develop a number of both elemental and reasonably credible hypotheses that ultimately may point us toward a grand solution if such a thing exists. What follows is a sample of those hypotheses. And remember, they're hypotheses, just tentative statements. By the way, epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge, or more precisely, credibility. First, the wreck is the Grunion. There was only one American sub lost in that area. This wreck has English markings on the hatch wheel. In addition, the limbar, or drain holes, and the prop guards are identical to the Grunion. A significant part of the bow is gone, and there is severe crimping at the top and both sides of the break, which tends to indicate that it was caused primarily by hydrostatic pressure. The aft battery hatch was blown open. The locking mechanism is clearly broken. We do not understand what kind of explosion caused it. The sub was not planning to use the deck gun to sink the Kanemaru. There is no physical evidence to show this. However, to use a 3-inch gun to sink a 7,000-ton cargo ship and exposing the sub and personnel to gunfire while you still have 4 torpedoes left is not the action that a prudent commander would make. Neither the main pressure hull or the conning tower show signs of shell penetration. The main pressure hull shows severe hydrostatic damage. If it had been flooded, that would have not occurred. The jury is still out as to what caused the damage to the conning tower. The loss of depth control was possibly amplified by the shot from the Kanemaru. After that shot, there was a dull thud. Dirty brown liquid shot up, a rod shot up and then fell back. The entire crew of the Kanemaru saw it and yelled banzai. The operative term here is possibly. We do not have good information as to the immediacy between the shell hitting the water and the dull thud afterwards. The rear dive planes are in a full down position. Both periscopes and dive planes were controlled electrically, not hydraulically. The significance of the electrical operation is that it's unlikely that with power off that they could have dropped to that position. That tends to indicate that they were somehow locked that way right from the surface. Yutaka has continued to contribute to the Grunion project. In January, he traveled halfway around the world to Boston to strengthen the connection he felt for this effort. Yutaka's desire to make a difference and his overwhelming sense of responsibility for the tragedy war are deeply motivating forces. At the time the first sonar search discovery was announced, Yutaka wrote, "I remember the time when I drew a Kiska map on the back of a photocopy. At that time, I was in the imaginary world of the book. But today my drawing becomes real, substantial enterprise. When I found Ira's report, saw the original map that is the origin of my pencil drawing, I teared in the library. I feel the papers came from Kiska, waiting for me for more than 60 years. Waiting things are now calling us. Utaka has been constantly involved in our analysis, among other things pointing out that there was a fourth witness, Fukuwama, who substantiated some of the observations. Fukuwama also wrote a book about the event that sold 33,000 copies. A number of members of the Grunion family sent Utaka thank you notes. They give one a feel of the significance of his effort. Here are some examples.
I wish that I could be there at the airport when you arrive and shake your hand and thank you in person. I hope you know what an impact you have made on our lives. Carol Boo Harrington.
Words cannot express how much you mean to us and how grateful we are that you cared enough to lead us to our loved ones who've been gone for over 65 years. Mary Parzial Bentz.
My uncle, Michael Francis Mo Collins, was 24 years old when he went down with the USS Grunion. Our family has had a Michael Collins for 5 generations. You helped find our Michael number 3, and we will never forget you. Mary Ann Collins Marino.
Utaka's email after the trip provides another window into his thinking. Before, I was virtual member of this effort, but now after visit to Boston, I feel I become substantial member collaborating with many other Americans. I feel I can do something and I must do. Sincerely, Yutaka Iwasaki, January 10th, 2008. Yutaka's concern and support continue to define international compassion. Typical press coverage has been along the lines of a search by 3 sons for their father's soul. The story is bigger than that, much bigger. It's a story of collaboration of people all over the world who, without formal direction, are contributing their compassion, their wisdom, and their effort. It makes us think that there may be hope for this planet. If we could have some lights.
Is that your voice? Yes. I would like to mention a couple other things that have happened since this has been put together. Out in the Navy base in Pearl Harbor, wandering around about the time of the Korean War, and he saw a bell in a scrap heap, and he asked the Navy if he could have it. And the Navy said no, but then about a year later, he was down in the South Pacific and he receives a package, which is the bell. The bell weighs well over 100 pounds and is not a featherweight. So anyway, but he recognized the significance of it and took it back to his hometown, which happens to be Greenville, Mississippi. Then it also just happens that one of the crew, and Edward Knowles, had come from Greenville. And it also just happens that he had a niece who lived in Greenville, Mississippi, who had gone over to the visitor center and saw this bell that says USS Grunion 1942 in it. And she sent some photos to a relative of hers who sent them on to me. And at first I didn't recognize it because you couldn't see the printing on it, but after a little persistence, we actually got a hold of it. And then what happened is we had a memorial in Cleveland, Ohio. I know every one of these kind of big stories, but the memorial in Cleveland was held there because there was a boat called the USS Cod, which is the sister ship of the Grunion. So as we were doing these comparisons over here, we'd see some oddball looking thing down there, and we'd say, what in the world is that? Well, we'll go to the Cod and look at it on the Cod, and it gave us a basis for comparison. But anyway, when you do a memorial, one of the things that you do is a tolling of the bells for the 52 subs that were lost during the World War II. And we were able to, with a lot of effort, to get that bell up to Cleveland. Now, that was a big story in itself. My younger brother, John, who, by the way, is one of the co-founders of Boston Scientific, he was flying down to do a presentation somewhere in that area and figured he could stop by and pick up the bell. And after a lot of, they had agreed to do it. But he was at the airport, and by that time the story had gotten quite well known, and so the place was just packed with people, including the mayors of every town around there. And but no bell. And then all of a sudden along comes a truck, and behind it a flatbed trailer, and on the flatbed trailer a front-end loader, and the bell. But the problem was they couldn't get the bell detached from the stand. And the combination was well over 300 pounds, and no way would it fit in the plane. So the problem was, what do you do next? So somebody got a hacksaw, and they tried to cut it, but it was this bridge steel, and that wouldn't cut. And luckily, somebody got a hold of a cutting torch. They cut off the bottom of the stand and were able to get it into the plane. But that's just one of the stories. A second thing that's happened, again, from this collaboration from people all over the world, was over here. The Grunion had sunk, about the July 15th, 2 Japanese sub-chasers. And we, in a broad sense again, have located the wife of the commander of the sub-chaser that was sunk. And 6 months ago, she was 98 years old. We sent her pressed flowers from Kiska, from the sons of Catherine E. Abele. And she has returned that gift with something that you can see over there that she hand-wove herself and sent to the sons of Catherine E. Abele. There's one or two other things before we open up questions. There's so many other stories to this thing, it just goes on and on and on. But there was a destroyer named after our dad. And that destroyer was doing duty off of Okinawa, what they call picket duty, which is basically you stick yourself way out in the edge of the perimeter of the action, you might say, and you have a radar so that you can warn people that the Japanese flight planes are coming in. And it was sunk. It was sunk by a horde of kamikazes. And it just happens that a person who was on that ship lives in Worcester and has just finished writing a book about the subject. It's just an unbelievable story. What had happened is typically, that was in the days when the Japanese were getting pretty desperate, and they would send in a group of roughly 30 of these suicide bombers. And the method for preventing that type of attack was that you call in the Air Force, they were terrible flight pilots because they just didn't know how to do it. They taught them how to take off but not how to land. But the protection never made it, and they come in 2 or 3 at a time and they would shoot them down, and then finally one of them came down and hit the Manadel Abele, and then it was hit by a thing called a Baka bomb, which is basically a rocket-controlled, a rocket-powered, but human-controlled bomb, and that had hit the stack of the Manadel Abele and split it in 2 pieces. And there were a reasonable number of survivors, and as I said, one of them was this Roy Anderson, who is living in Worcester today, 91 years old and in very good shape. There are a number of calendars. The state of Alaska has been very interested in this project, And if you look at the January issue of those calendars, which are open for anybody who would like one, there's no charge at all, they're free. There's a whole, the January is dedicated to the Grunion project. So if you like one, try to pick it up afterwards. Oh, and I do mention that also over in the corner are the letters that, the correspondence that went back and forth between my mother and the next of kin. And they just, you know, they're extremely difficult to read, some of them with a dry eye. I mean, some of the situations are just incredible. Anyway, are there any questions?
Bruce, will anybody go down to the Grunion anymore, or is that finished?
That's an interesting story. Paul Allen, who was the one of the other founders of Microsoft, has offered to use his ship, which is called the Octopus. It's 400 feet. It costs $200 million a year to $20 million a year to maintain it. And he has offered to do a third trip on his dime, you might say, but we haven't taken him up on it yet. I'm not quite sure what we would go after. We've really kind of learned a great deal about what caused the loss since that DVD was put together. It's sort of complicated, but I'm not sure that we would get much more by a third trip, to be very frank. Go ahead. Yeah.
Is there any plan to look for the valve, the 52 feet? Because it appears
Oh, yes. That's a very good question. That, you know, every one of these things is a big story in itself. Obviously, when the second trip went along, that we hoped to find the valve. And with the side scan sonar, we saw something at that point, but refinding things with the ROV is very difficult. On the other hand, what many people, so we refound it, and I'm using the broad sense, in 23 minutes. In other words, from the time that the ROV was down to the surface, and you recognize it's 3/4 of a mile down. It's astronomically deep, and you get currents, and you don't know exactly where it is because the GPS of the side scan sonar is not the same GPS that's up in the boat. So because of drifting and things of this nature. So the point is that they found it in 23 minutes, which is almost unheard of. When they went back for the Titanic, it took them like 4 days, and other times they'd gone for several weeks and never found it. So you get an order of magnitude. It's a little bit of divine intervention, let's put it that way. Yes?
We allow a limited number of Navy people in here each mod test. What was the U.S. Navy's involvement in this, Bruce?
It's just as big a story as everything else. The Navy was not interested in recognizing the Grunion. Now, there are reasonable people, and the reason is that there's a guideline, you might say, that says in the Navy we do not encourage civilian recognition of Navy wrecks. And if you're in the Navy, you learn to sort of follow orders. But we happen to have, the problem was when we did the memorial, we wanted to get it recognized, because at that point, I mean, it was pretty clear cut. There was only one sub lost, and there was no credit. You could see the word close on there. That's not Japanese. But we happen to have the director of the COD is a PhD in physics, but he also he's very heavy in one of his earlier projects was putting a man on the moon, let's put it that way. And anyway, he knew a number of individuals who were very, very high up in the ranks of the services, and was able to find somebody who was higher up than the Donnelly, who was the admiral in charge of all submarines. That's how we got it recognized finally, and just at the very last moment. I mean, it was October 10th, I think it was, just before the memorial, October 1st, just before the memorial. But they have not been involved in it at all. Yes?
You didn't speak very much about the duds that were fired by the Grunion. Did you look into that at all? Because I recall there was quite a scandal.
Oh, that's the understatement of the year. First thing, there's a phenomenal book called Iron Men and Tin Fish, written by Newpower is his name. And what he did, the problem was that the torpedoes didn't work. Let's put that bottom line. So if you want to say what caused the loss of the Grunion, clearly one of the problems was the torpedoes. But if you jump before that, one of the problems was that the upper brass at in Hawaii ignored the problem, and you could jump one step behind that because they were doing what they were told to be done. In other words, that they were to use what there were several problems, and I'm jumping around a little bit. There was a thing called a magnetic exploder, and their difficulty was that when the war started, because it had been, they predicted it would end up in the European continent, they weren't worrying about torpedoes very much. And the only place that made them was Newport, Rhode Island, and they made 2.5 a day. We had a reasonable supply in the Philippines, but when the war started, the Japanese, I think 280 of them down there, they bombed them, ruined them all. So anyway, there was a major concern with keeping up with the supply of torpedoes. And the quote, secret weapon was that there was a magnetic exploder that would theoretically, if the torpedo went low underneath the ship, the target ship, would explode and break the basic, the keel, you might say. And that was very important because if a torpedo hits the side of a ship, it does not break it. The problem with the magnetic exploders was that when you would shoot a torpedo, it would go out to the end of what they call the arming distance. In other words, it goes 450 yards, and there's a little propeller on the front of it that says, okay, now you can explode, you get ready to explode if something happens. But what was happening is it go out to the end of the arming distance and then explode. Now, if you were designing, if Japan was designing the torpedo from their point of view to point out where the subs were, they couldn't have done a better job. Because all of a sudden what would happen is these torpedoes would shoot out, go out 450 yards away from the sub, explode, and then the enemy would see the explosion, wouldn't be hurt at all, but they could see a bubble path that pointed right where the sub was. And in the early part of the war, there was sort of an extraordinary situation. What happened was a sub was able to get in between two Japanese aircraft carriers that were going in after the Philippines. And it's just an unbelievably unusual situation. So they shot a torpedo from the stern tubes toward one aircraft carrier, shot the other one toward the other aircraft carrier, and obviously they went down deep, fast as you can go. And they heard two explosions, so they assumed that they had sunk two aircraft carriers in almost, in a few seconds. It turned out they learned from Ultra, the code that was broken by our secret people, that both torpedoes had pre-exploded and that the aircraft carriers were unaffected. Just unbelievable story. Any other questions? Yes.
So what caused the Grunion to sink?
Oh, a good question. Let me go to that one. The basic difficulty, well, I mean, obviously that the loss was caused by the loss of the torpedoes was bad, but the evidence right now is that the shot from the Kane Maru did no major damage except that, and you saw up there that a machine gun shell had bent one of the periscopes. That's the #1 periscope. The second shot that from the Kane Maru, which is a 3-inch gun, and it's actually for aircraft, so I mean it's kind of a diddly little thing, but that hit the other periscope. So now they were basically blind. And we had a very interesting meeting a while ago up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and we again, using the broad sense, got a hold of a number of ex-commanders on subs and asked them, what would you do in that situation? And they all were saying, what you do is you dive deep, 100 feet, and get away from that situation, and then you come up and you examine the situation and see if you can fix up the periscope so you can do something. And so we believe that they were diving very rapidly. Now, the problem was, as you notice that rear dive plane, that's what controls the depth of a sub. And the rear dive plane in those days was electrically controlled, and I have a schematic of the diagram, I mean of the mechanism between it's a 12.5 horsepower motor, and it goes through, it's like a Rube Goldberg device, you almost would say. So the evidence is very, very strong that they were doing this dive and trying to get out of sight as fast as possible, and that the rear dive plane jammed, and at that point it was difficult or impossible to recover. They got down below crush depth, and that's it. That is, the evidence is very strong in that direction. Yes?
Yes, I think we all know what a cod is, but can you tell us about the Grunion?
Well, oh, you mean the ship fish?
Yeah.
Oh, the fish is is a fish that comes up on the shores of California on full moon days, I believe it is, and apparently people go after them. I mean, they're quite a big deal. Oh, it very does. So, but that's what. I mean, they're all named after fish, obviously.
Yeah, it's a mating thing.
Yes.
At that time, here they came up, and they blood burrows down,
Yeah.
wraps around, and then stuff happens.
Well, I've never seen one. I've never been on California.
It's a
So,
large smell.
yes, yes.
I don't have a question, I just want to say, I'm very impressed with you guys and the tremendous job you've done.
Well,
Wow.
yeah, you have to give credit to a tremendous number of people all over the world. I mean, we have somebody in Israel that's played a tremendous part of the thing. The Japanese, the number of the people in Japan have played a big part. And then people everywhere in this country have just been wonderful. And that's what's made this thing work. It's not just one person. Now, to be very fair, you can obviously judge there's a little bit of a dollar and cents involved. And as I pointed out earlier, and I love that John, my youngest brother, started Boston Scientific. When we do presentations together, people come up, Boston Scientific makes stents. And so people come up and say, John, will you sign my stent, please?
Bruce, with the crushing of the ship, the hull, if you get down below a certain level, is that what caused the 53 feet to be missing from the front?
No, what we believe has happened is half and half. What happened is that section where it broke at the 52 feet coming in is a weaker section of the hull, and it is squashed in, and then the sub comes down and it hits the bottom, the bow first, and breaks off. And it hit just like a ski jumper does when he goes off of a ski jump, except that, it's a little deeper. Yes? No.
You know what happens to human remains when they...
Oh, that's a big story. No, what happens is it disappears, particularly in this water, because even the bones just completely dissolve. Now, I don't know how that is in other cases. I just saw yesterday a video of the perch and the wahoo. Now, those are in real shallow water, and they're covered with all types of growth. The Grunion, as you know, had nothing at all. I mean, there was some sponge-type material on there, and a few crabs, and a few fish down there, which was sort of interesting, I thought. But unusually little growth down there, and of course, some of the quality, because we are so deep, the video quality is what people say is probably the best they've ever seen. It's cold. It's 32-degree water down there. Yes.
There was, I thought, a little orange fish down there. Was that right?
I don't know what kind of fish it was. We have some oceanography people that are analyzing it. But one of the interesting ramifications, if you bring these things up to the surface, they pop because they've been under such extreme pressure. But we don't know. Yes.
I just comment that slide that shows the groove in the bottom where the sub slid down.
Yes.
So that's quite impressive because there's a lot of friction between the sub and the bottom.
Yes.
And that's either a very steep grade or it would have a lot of momentum.
We have many, many discussions as to what speed the Grunion hit the bottom. I mean, we got somebody said that the Scorpion, I believe it was, that was lost a while ago, hit the bottom at 60 miles an hour. Now, the people, the general consensus is that was not the case with the Grunion. The Grunion probably was about 15 knots or something, 15 miles an hour, somewhere in that range. But it's a lot of weight. And, so you got weight moving down, and it's going down a slope, and that's a volcanic ash area. In fact, that's actually the side of a volcano, underwater volcano. So that's all you can answer.
Okay.
But, one of the things that's really made this thing work, and one of the reasons I like doing these presentations, is people, and if you look at those addresses up there, if you go to that 999info.net, there's all types of stuff on the Grunion, and there's also a website called USSGrunion.com, which you could spend a week reading it. I mean, it's just an unbelievable amount of stuff on various subjects such as analysis of the loss and the search for relatives is still going on, as a matter of fact. I mean, there's a big thing going on next week, I think, on that. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Just a comment that survival in that 32-degree water would be very short.
Oh, yeah. Well, the evidence is, and I'd like to see this tested a little bit, but basically when a sub implodes, it's very instantaneous. So I don't think there's anything to do about survival. I think it's just plain, you're dead. It's very, very, very quickly, but.
Just a couple of quick things. Tomorrow is the 80th birthday of this young man, and I think honoring his dad like that's a wonderful thing.
I would like to invite all of those who are close to 80 or around it to go to 999info.net on your computer and look at the thing. There's a thing called PBNE. It's called Peanut Butter and Energy. and what you do is you right-click it so you can download it, and then it will say download to link file. Download it and then play it. And I challenge anybody here to watch that with a straight face. I think you will then find it fun.
Bruce has some wonderful displays here, and the Friends of the Council of Aging each month gives us a $50 gift certificate to the restaurant in the middle of town for the speaker and his family, and thank you, Bruce. That's
Thank
for
you very much.
And Bruce is available for questions. Again, we have this stuff over here. Next month, our speaker is John Carlson, who I've heard speak on Douglas MacArthur, a wonderful thing. And when you come next time, if you think of it, please bring some cookies or brownies or something even fancier than that. We get the coffee from Starbucks, and thank you all for coming.